This is a basic map of the route we took. We entered Kruger at the Punda Gate, spent the night in a tent at Punda. Then we went through the border, through the Bafuri border post into Mozambique. It was all very quick. There were no others crossing the border at the time, so that was great. We then took the road parallel to the Limpopo down to the ferry crossing near Mapai. We crossed the ferry, which was fine. Then there was a nice tar road from there to the Zim border. Again, the border was a breeze. Then we spent the first night in the Ghana at the Rossi Pools camp, which is in the south. We then travelled to the north of Ghana, visited all those camps up there, and then basically reversed the route coming back again. This was a yellow-bellied green bull that shared our breakfast at Punda. It was a fairly miserable day, but we enjoyed having the company. There were some pretty aloes at the Klopfontein Dam on the way to the border.
Just a brown-headed parrot. We saw lots of parrots, and we always stopped because we were hoping to see the Cape parrot or the grey-headed or the Mayas, but we only saw the brown-headed. Python, I think most of you saw on my WhatsApp, was the width of it was as long as the road is wide, and it was just very interesting to see.
Oh, so he's got a bulge there in his tummy.
Yes, I've never seen such a huge snake. Gee.
Second night we camped at Tumela Safari Lodge. It was quite a nice camp. We had our own ablution and we went for a walk that day and we saw the Pell's fishing owl, but unfortunately I couldn't get a photo of it.
And the next morning it was still freezing and raining. We'd had horrible weather up until then. And when we were just ready to leave, we saw that the front left wheel had a puncture. So the guy who was wandering around helped us, but the first spare wheel wouldn't fit. It only fits the back, so then we had to swap again and get the second spare wheel. So we were quite delayed, and the fellow who was helping us managed to spill all the oil out of our jack, so that was also a problem. And then we started on our horrible road, 75 k's to the Limpopo ferry, and that took us 3 hours.
The guy pedaling over there is going to fetch the ferry on the other side, so that we can cross the Limpopo River.
It's raised overhead, ending.
Oh, so you're watching that guy at the top there. Watch him, he's saying come.
Cool.
I was very pleased once we had landed safely on the other side. A lot of the on the other side, there were a whole lot of locals who sit under a tree and wait for ferries, and then as many as they can sort of tag along and help get us over, and then they all want to get taken to the next village. So we had 6 or 7 of these locals hanging onto our bumper and our running board and all that. It was quite hilarious.
It was about a 3-kilo ride from the ferry to the Mapai village, so we had these guys hanging on for about 3 kilos.
After getting into the park, after we first had to go through a security check with the army, we went to Mabaluta to book in, which is quite a little distance, and we arrived at Rossi at dusk. It was very late and pouring with rain and very, very cold. So when we sort of arrived there and saw that there was a lapa, I could have kissed them. It was just so wonderful to be able to unpack all our stuff under the lapa and, wash and get everything ready and have supper and so on, all in shelter instead of the rain. And also then the next morning was freezing cold, but again, it was lovely to be able to have breakfast and all that. It was misty and rainy, just looking over.
The Rossi Lapa is perched on the edge of the cliff overlooking the Nuanitsi River, and it's a lovely gorge with beautiful views, so that was really great.
Lion quite close by the first night at Rossi, and also hyena, and that was the only night that we heard lion, but we heard hyena, jackal, and then also leopard close by.
Leaving Rossi, we headed north to the northern camps. It's quite a long drive from the southern camp to the northern camps, and not much to see in between, very little game, as it's mainly just around water.
Our first camp up in the north was Gonarezhou. It was beautiful. That was a huge campsite with big trees, and there were lots of places that we could choose from. And it was just lovely sitting and watching everything come down. This is all on the Rundi River up in the north. All of the campsites overlook the Rundi River. And we went the next day, we went for a walk in the riverbed, which was also nice.
We've got a nice view of the white-browed kukul here.
We also saw the black kukul and the Senegal kukul while we were there, so that was nice.
After leaving the Lora, we headed north and went via the Gonarezhou viewpoint, which is looking down from the tops of the cliffs, which was very pretty. So typical scenery we drove through. This road was like an N1 compared to other roads. The next morning we were heading for Machiniwa Pan, and we followed the GPS routes which Tracks Africa gave us for the camp location. When we got there, we couldn't find the camp. We searched around, tried different locations, and in the end we decided we'll just wild camp on the banks of the Rundi River.
Yeah, it wasn't a great campsite. It was, but yeah, it was fine. Anyway, we had supper, and while we were having supper, we heard a bakkie drive past the road, and we finished off and were just sort of getting ready to go up to the tent, and we heard the bakkie come back, and then it turned off the road and came to where we were camping. And 2 rangers got out, and they wanted to know what we were doing there. So we told them our story and all the rest, and they said, no, well, we shouldn't be there, but we can sleep the night. And then they told us where to go for the pan. And so we did that and went to the pan the next morning. We were supposed to spend 2 nights at the pan, but then, the one we spent out in the wild. And while we were camped there, we saw such a nice interaction between two fish eagles and a Goliath heron fighting with each other.
They were obviously competing for the same meal, but it was very interesting. Machiniwa Pan was miles away from where we had spent the previous night, so the waypoint was way out. But the pan was lovely, nice shade all day. The pan in front of us with animals coming and going all day long. So it was very pleasant. Wish we could have spent 2 days there.
Lots of elephants, but this was so sad. This mom and her baby. The young elephant obviously had a very serious infection or fracture or something on the one hind leg and just couldn't walk. You can see how big and swollen the lower limb is. And it was very sad and traumatic to see how they struggled. He was also a youngster with only half a trunk. That was also sad. But on the upside, the one afternoon we were snoozing in the tent and we sort of heard the elephant and we looked out of our window and they were coming up towards the camp from the water hole and they started feeding in the shrubs in our camp. So that was exciting.
The next day we were heading for Gonarezhou Cliffs camps where we were going to spend 2 nights.
Yeah, we had to cross the Rundi River to get there. It was on the other side.
Yeah, and I'd programmed in to cross the river at Bopamela Causeway. When we got there, the banks of the river were washed away and it was impossible to cross there. So we had to sort of find a new route. We tried phoning the office with a set phone, but we couldn't get decent sound out of them. And we started heading back, and then we luckily met another vehicle coming out with the opposite direction. And he said, no, there's a new crossing, Chitovi crossing. And we passed the Chitovi crossing sign, but it was all boarded off. And that one was also closed, but there was a new one that they'd created. So eventually we got to that and we crossed there. The day should have been 43 kilometres, but in the end, with all our backwards and forwards and finding the correct causeway, it took us 7 hours to get to Gonarezhou Cliffs.
This was also a beautiful camp, also 2 nights there. Just so lovely, all day. We never rode around during the day. We just sat at the camps and watched as animals came and went, and the birds and so on. And just the isolation and remoteness, nobody else anywhere near. It was beautiful. The second night, the wind blew like you cannot believe. We were waiting for the whole car to go over, but we survived nevertheless, and that was the exciting night of the leopard walking through the camp. Derek can talk you through that later. But also, as we were leaving, we always just walk around there, millions of birds and looking, and there were birds in distress. So we went over and had a look to see if it was a snake or what was it that they were upset about, and it was a pearl-spotted owl. So we got some nice close-ups of that. In fact, we saw a lot of pearl-spotted owls. That was lovely.
Every night I'd set up the camera trap at the base of the ladder, looking out to see what we'd catch in the night. and got the video here of leopard, hyena, and a number of genets at different camps. The leopard, we'd got up to go to the loo, and an hour later the leopard walked past, so it was a very close encounter. So it was great to see that. This camp was Chipinda Pools, which was also on the banks of the Rinde River. This was a communal camp, and although there were other campsites there, they were very far apart, so we didn't feel at all as though we were in a community camp. We'd originally booked this camp with the idea that we'd have to go to Shirundu to go and get our vaccination done. But anyway, we stayed here, which is quite nice. We now started our trip heading south, and the next night was at Benji Weir, which was a lovely, actually a double-story lapa, they called it a platform, on the banks of the river, high up, overlooking a dry riverbed. And again, the elephants and animals are just walking up and down the riverbed all day long, where the elephants are drinking from a khora, and then further down the river there was a very muddy pool where the elephants were enjoying a mud bath, and the other animals had to try and drink the muddy water. But a lovely camp, lovely scenery.
Another thing at Benji, my favourite camp, is all the impala lilies blooming.
Then it was back to Rossi Pool's camp for our last night in the park, before heading out to the border and heading back to Mela. Leaving the park, the border crossings were a breeze again. We found the Zimbabwe staff very friendly, the Mars guys not so much. And at most border crossings, it was usually the police that were sort of hanging around, hinting that they'd like something, a bribe or something to eat or drink, which was a bit unpleasant.
Now we had to get back into South Africa. We decided it would probably be quicker if we went straight down to the Limpopo, because we'd heard people had been crossing. So we thought we'd do that. Anyway, so we went along the tarred road and looking for the turnoff, but there was no turnoff. So we turned around and went into a little village and started asking, with lots of miming, where's the road to get to the Limpopo and Pafuri. But of course nobody speaks English, they all speak Portuguese. So it was really rough trying to understand each other. And then everyone we asked, no, come, he knows somebody, come. And then gradually we collected more and more villages, around us, trying to now find someone to tell us how to go. And eventually we saw the game ranger, and we could speak to somebody who understood us. And he was so sweet and helpful, and he told us exactly where to turn to get onto the dirt road to the Limpopo. And so we went, found his police station and so on, and turned left onto this road. And it started off quite happily, but deteriorated as we went along. It was a terrible road. I just wish actually that we had thought to take video there, because that was, Derek always says it's the worst road he's ever been on. But it was not fun.
The road was just, it wasn't technically challenging, it was just unpleasant, with lots of dongas you had to go through and axle twisters, and the cars throwing you around from side to side.
Yeah, no, it was not fun. And it took us 3 hours to do the 60-ish Ks. And then again, Tracks for Africa took us to the Limpopo, and the crossing had been washed down. We couldn't get in. And so we went back to a village, and thankfully this old chap was coming towards us. And we said, we want to go, or we mimed, we want to cross the river. No, he'll take us. So he jumps on the running board, and we must have gone about 3 Ks with him.
Yeah.
And eventually he said, no, okay, we're on the beach for the Limpopo, and he took us to the edge. And then he and Derek stood, and he just pointed and he said, you just cross here and you go get out there, and then he disappeared. and there was nobody else there. And so we decided, well, everybody else has
What's
gone
his
to,
name?
so we'll just do it.
The tracks on the island. And there's the track. You can see tracks here on the left. Just in front of you. I think it's going this way, between that log and that stick. Is that them going up that bank there?
So off we went, and actually the crossing was fine, thankfully. We didn't get stuck in the middle, otherwise I don't know what we would have done. But anyway, we went across, and then it was another quite a couple of kilometres to get to the main road to the border. And along the way again, we gained a passenger who stood on the running board so that we could give him a lift to the main road.
Subsequently measured the width of the river from the tracks that I'd recorded, and at that point the river was 440 metres wide.
And we went to Demela and spent the night there with no puncture this time.
That night we opted for a safari tent which had its own ablutions rather than going into the tent, so it was a bit of a luxury.
We didn't have to climb down to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, which was quite nice. But it's lovely there because you're overlooking a lagoon and lots of birds and water birds, and you're all on your own, even though you're not remote. There are people close by, but it was lovely. And then the next day we went through Pafuri border again very easily. Again, we were the only people going through, and we went to Punda and this time it wasn't freezing and cold, and we had a lovely evening there, although we weren't in a tent, we were in a kind of a bungalow stroke room, not so very nice, but anyway. And then we were home. So that was our trip, and it was lovely, and it was beautiful, and yeah, we enjoyed not every moment, not the road coming home.